So welcome back. This is extremely interesting session where we would explore the partnerships, the ideas which are being sort of discussed since morning in terms of how we actually go forward, what kind of collaborative approaches are possible, what kind of universal thought process we can really have to bring in partnerships not only globally as the very focus since morning is, but also in terms of how do we bring in Global South into the picture. What kind of efforts are required to be made to take that process forward, as Honorable Minister emphasized this morning about inclusivity. How do we bring in inclusivity? How do we bring in issues which are in a way ensuring both access and inclusion within this revolution that we are seeing. Also, the collaborative AI would bring in issues in terms of how we go ahead with partnerships, what kind of role that we see countries to play, what kind of entities that can come up for partnership, and also in terms of providing the necessary fillip with the private sector so that we have sort of efforts which are needed for access and inclusion without compromising the necessary engine of growth, which is innovation in this sector. So we need to have this delicate balance that can bring in the benefits of AI for everyone, trying to bring in to all the regions in the world and do not make it in a way sort of expensive, which is in a way is being tried. As we heard this morning, the G20 presidency of India tried to introduce the idea of the digital public infrastructure, how DPI is actually going to bring in this access, equity and inclusion as part of the focus that AI requires. And for that to take forward, I have an extremely accomplished panel. It's a rather, I would say, fair balance in terms of the private sectors, the innovators, the policy makers, and also the entities which have been doing the great work in terms of industry grouping, but also in terms of how entities like OECD and others who are analyzing science, technology, policy, and its impact in terms of ensuring this access, equity, inclusion component adequately addressed. We also would very much like to mention here in terms of how we see the public-private partnership. The idea of some global governance mechanism would come up seems to be a sort of distant dream at this point, but we would require something to come up as we are seeing, at least in the finance sector. It is required more and more intense discussions and debates as countries introduce digital currencies, as we see cross-border payment transactions being sort of secured, and more options beyond SWIFT are emerging. So the new global public goods which are emerging in the finance sector, with growing integration of the global south in the economy, and the statistics from the World Bank which have just been released are absolutely clear in terms of pace at which international trade is expanding within the global south. And you find that the e-payment transactions are growing 3.5 times more within the global south. So this beautiful paper that International Monetary Fund released just last month, it very clearly brings out the gravitas of this change that we are seeing in terms of growing digitalization of trade within global south, and that also within few countries. So you have far greater challenges in terms of managing this science policy perspective that is required, and also in terms of how we can bring in this delicate balance that I referred to in terms of public-private partnership. The perspectives of countries which have come up with different development strategies are looking more sort of polarized, and that the scope for contestation in terms of policy positions by countries, by delegations, by national governments or international initiatives, they also seem very, very polarized. So in that backdrop, this session is trying to bring in the ideas in terms of collaboration. How do we leverage on complementarities that exist, both in the regulatory framework, but as I said, without compromising innovation. So that balancing would be extremely challenging. The willingness for avoiding governance would be actually jeopardizing the future introduction of technology and the AEI, access, equity, and inclusion that I said. So we need to act in time. Countries that have already introduced CBDC and are going forward, the Bank for International Settlement is taking more time to decide, but it is becoming more and more complicated. Central banks are globally concerned about this. And this is not one sector, but it has spread to many other sectors. Many more infrastructure and finance-related sectors are getting affected. So we don't have luxury of time. Technology is expanding. People are introducing. We need global frameworks to come up. We need efforts in terms of how countries agree, at least on some minimum principles, so that we take off and we take the dimensions forward. As I said, the panel is extremely accomplished, and I'm sure we would, at the end of this panel, would have some light at the end of the tunnel to see what direction we need to go in. On my list, the first speaker is Shri Rohit Ratish, who is Joint Secretary. And some of you may be aware, India established in 2011 Development Partnership Administration, DPA, in the Ministry of External Affairs. This is a division which spearheads the Development Partnership Program of India. Of course, the concerned divisions, but this is the one that is doing the thinking that is required in terms of supports and to our partner countries. Some of you must be seeing how Global South's rise is also being adequately supported by countries from the South. And you find that the share of official development assistance, ODA, in the development finance flows across the world is going down, and the partnership within the Global South is going up, both for infrastructure, for policy lessons, etc. So DPA is playing an extremely important role, and he himself is very closely involved in the issues that are related to digital public infrastructure and the future vision that is required. The G20 presidency of India, as I said, has placed DPI upfront. Countries are taking them forward, and we are seeing how the polarizing perspectives in terms of what role and that we are discussing since early 90s role of state and market. That question is haunting us back, and with this advancement in technology, the question is far more clear, and the lessons that we have from the great miracle, the famous report that World Bank produced, the question is still not settled. The idea of this delicate balance between role of market and state is something which is very important in light of DPI. So without further ado, let me invite Shri Rohit Ratish for his remarks. Over to you.
Thank you, Professor. Distinguished speakers, ladies and gentlemen, good evening to you all. Let me thank the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology for inviting me as a representative of the MEA at the Global IndiaAI Summit. More so for this particular session on collaborative AI for global partnership. From an Indian standpoint, it is a timely initiative to deliberate on the necessity for different actors in our country, the government, the consortium of industry representatives here, and civil society, to align, collaborate, and present to the world the idea of collaborative AI as a force for global good. That AI matters to us is established and is foregrounded by rapid advances in generative AI applications and compute power in the last 3 to 4 years. What undergirds and propels our discussions today on collaborative AI is how its immense power and potential can be harnessed within and across nations to help deliver on common goals across geographies with varying levels of human and economic development and for the global good. In this context, the adoption in March this year of a resolution by the UNGA on steering AI towards global good and a faster realization of sustainable development is cardinal. This UNGA resolution resolves to bridge AI and other digital divides, and both between within countries and to promote safe, secure, and trustworthy AI systems to accelerate progress towards the full realization of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. This can be seen in the light of the GPAI Ministerial Declaration of December 23, which put at its heart the need to collaborate and create applications of AI in healthcare, agriculture, and other areas of socio-economic development that concern all of us. Ladies and gentlemen, as you know, AI will have a profound impact on the way we as a society think and operate. A PwC study predicted that global GDP will see a 14% bump by 2030 due to AI. However, much of this GDP growth is likely to be concentrated in a few countries, especially in the West. Are we then to mainstream and enable an AI revolution that treats the global South as reductive geography to data sources and users and consumers? The concerns in the global South are many, from misdiagnosing an indigenous breed of cow in Kenya to the dearth of adequate data centers, cloud computing, and cybersecurity infrastructure, from the need to uplevel and upscale human resources and curricula to meet AI's potential and to curbing risks that reside in data privacy and governance in the global South, from design flaws and ethical biases in algorithms and neural networks to the barriers for access to data, testbeds, and trained models. If we hesitate to meet these challenges head on, AI can widen and deepen developmental schisms and inequities. For AI to be collaborative and tackle the diverse set of global and societal challenges we face, it is key that India plays a role in shaping both the narrative and the execution, with the concerns of the global South in mind. Alongside being home to the fifth largest economy and 18% of the global population, India now ranks 8th in AI patents and 4th in AI research papers. India's leadership of the G20 last year cut the mustard on matters of global governance, of technology, including AI, data for development, and digital public infrastructure. To voice the concerns of the global South community that India belongs to is now a mantra of our foreign policy today. Ladies and gentlemen, India's role as a development partner to the global South has grown in the last 2 decades. Our status as an aid recipient not too long ago shapes our vision and approach to development partnerships, one that is driven by the needs and aspirations of our partner countries. Our development partnership projects and initiatives, with presently a financial outlay of approximately $40 billion, spans about 70 countries in the global South and covers infrastructure, roads, ports, railways, power, as well as education, food security, health, and disaster relief. Every year, we train around 15 to 20,000 civil servants and professionals from across the global South, 40% of them women, in subjects that range from governance, management, the sciences, the social sciences, gender, climate and renewables, technology, and finance, at various training institutes across India through MEA's flagship iTech program. As we speak, a customized training program on responsible AI is being held near this venue at CDAC through the iTech program for 15 professionals from the Dominican Republic. I say this to spotlight our emphasis on demand-driven development partnerships that puts human resource development at the core of it. Ladies and gentlemen, secure, safe, and trustworthy AI holds the promise of better education, health, prosperity, and well-being for all, including the citizens of the global South. On the other hand, insecure, unsafe, and untrustworthy AI is a force that can throw sand in the gears of our common ideals and objectives expressed in the 2030 Agenda. Collaborative AI for global partnerships, therefore, is not just an idea whose time has come, but also a virtue of necessity. To my mind, a task force, if you will, under the rubric of this session of government, industry, and civil society would be useful to harness our efforts and expertise to democratize AI and to make it work for all, including the global South. And what better place to unpack the different streams of thought and action than here at this summit, and what better time than now. It took 2 months for ChatGPT to reach 100 million users, something that took fixed telephones 75 years. We see the proliferation of generative AI applications in large language models and predictive algorithms in our daily lives today, and cannot help but think that artificial general intelligence awaits us in a not so distant future. Ladies and gentlemen, we are at a tipping point in human history. Our ideas and choices and actions today will echo deeply into the future across generations. And those generations on this planet will need to coexist and hopefully thrive with AI, this new digital species that we have created. I thank you for your patience and hope that your thoughts are provoked at this summit and its discussions. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Rudratish. Let me now invite Joint Secretary with Meti, Shri Suresh Pal, who has been Sushil Pal, who has been leading the work that has led to, for the first time, multilateral understanding on and consensus on DPI. And this is an important achievement for the G20 presidency that India had, and also in terms of shaping the agenda forward in terms of how we look at the issues that are coming up, which Mr. Rohit Ratish mentioned in terms of their complexity, and also the whole morning today, afternoon, we have been discussing these dimensions which Mr. Sushil Pal would bring in. His important contribution as co-chair for Digital Economy Working Group within G20 is also an extremely important element here, which I wanted to mention in terms of how we are seeing the governance and dimensions of engagement, partnerships within AI to see how we go forward. So without further ado, Sushil, let me invite you. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm supposed to speak on the democratization of AI and the national efforts and the global initiatives taken by India. Looking at the expert panel we have and the audience we have, I think I'll also touch upon the challenges which we think, especially from the global south perspective. AI is certainly the most transformative technology of this century. Sounds like cliche, but I think I got to start saying with this. Some, call it the greatest invention since the internet. A few call it maybe as transformative as the printing press or the electricity. But certainly it holds extraordinary potential, both for the promise and peril. India's approach to the AI is summed up in its national strategy for AI, which essentially is to leverage AI for the social good and ensuring its ethical standards at the same time and respecting the principles of transparency, accountability, privacy, and security. Keeping AI for all and AI for good at the core of its heart, we have taken steps towards democratization of AI and digital economy, both at the national level through the Indian AI mission, as well as at the global level through the multilateral initiatives like GPAI and G20 as well, and even the present ongoing discussions in the GDC. Democratization of AI is at the heart of India's approach to the deployment of technology, and this is evidenced by our DPI approach and this approach which we got adopted for the first time in the G20 forum as well. It itself envisages a multi-stakeholder approach, which includes both the government, the community, as well as the private sector. The beauty of this approach that it's a pretty participative approach, and which makes sure that there are no entry barriers even for the smallest of the startups, and also ensures that there is no monopolization of the technology. This government has played a key role not only in designing the DPI and laying down the rules of the DPI, but also it has made a lot of investments in the DPI, be it Aadhaar, be it UPI, be it Ayushman Bharat, which is our health DPI, or be it DigiLocker. I believe that the same approach we need to adopt for the deployment and designing and deployment of the AI as well. As the founder and the current lead chair of the GPAI, India is leading the efforts for effective multi-stakeholder collaboration for responsible development and use of AI. To further its vision of democratization of AI resources and equitable access to the benefit of all of AI, India proposed the adoption of a collaborative AI for global partnership as a new thematic priority area in GPAI, which was approved and adopted by the almost all 29 member countries last year in New Delhi's GPAI summit. Coming to the challenges, one of the objectives of this convening is also to deliberate and highlight upon the challenges and the opportunities. Conversations around the opportunities are more or less similar, be it across the global north or global south. It is the conversations about the challenges where we see a stark difference vis-a-vis the global north and south. The G7 conversations about the challenges of AI largely revolves around the right-based and the risk-based approaches, largely talking about the privacy, security, and transparency. However, when you talk about global south, on the other hand, we are still grappling with the issues of lack of resources like compute, the skills, capacities, quality data sets, even the ownership and control of data is the issue here, and at the same time, the bias and the discrimination in the existing AI models. This is largely because of concentration of AI developmental ecosystem with a handful of organizations. AI system should seek to reflect the diverse range of linguistic, cultural, racial, and geographical context to mitigate the perpetuation of existing biases, existing systemic biases, and also to avoid the future biases. Standards is another very important challenge for developing economies. The standards can actually contain risk, can accelerate safety, and can also enable interoperability. For AI, we need to divide the socio-technical standards, which contextualizes them to the local requirement of each countries and describe ethics and ideals, and also provide technical means to achieve them. As for the standards, it's important that the Global South join this bandwagon of standards as early as possible. We missed the bus on the technical aspects and the standards of internet, and we're still catching up. We still don't have any clue as to how the packet moves on the internet, and none of our countries have even the test beds for testing out these technical aspects of the internet. We are primarily the users of internet only. So, and I'm sure we don't want the same situation in AI a few years down the line. Therefore, I believe that the states need to have a substantial stake in AI design and development and deployment, which at present is dominated by a few organizations and a few countries only. We need to reimagine the public-private partnership models and build regulatory sandboxes wherein the experiments of the entrepreneurs are matched and weighed against the equitable solutions to societal challenges. Another important challenge for Global South is the risk of widening income gap, as AI productivity gains are largely captured by a few wealthy nations and a few firms. Further, AI could potentially erode the competitive advantage of many developing countries, which is largely the cheap labor. As AI automation advances, it would drastically alter the existing economic incentive of the trade and the investments. While on one side, the Global South countries need to create jobs for the growing young population, on the other hand, AI automation would really upend the traditional growth models and developmental strategies. Hence, AI requires very careful navigation in many of the developing countries. Therefore, overcoming the increased concentration of AI development ecosystem within a handful of organizations and economies require collaboration and coordination at multilateral as well as multi-stakeholder level. To bridge the AI digital divide, India is encouraging a multi-stakeholder engagement through forums like GPAI, G20, and Global Digital Compact. We are happy to see that this initiative has found traction with the current Brazilian presidency as well, wherein one of its priorities recognizes the challenges which emerge from the inequitable distribution of the AI resources, and as well as finding pathways to leverage AI for inclusive and sustainable development. With this present convening, we look forward to the perspective of different stakeholders and experts to identify institutional mechanism for implementing the collaborative AI for global partnership goals. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Sushilji, for setting the broad context for today's panel discussion that we would begin now. You have identified as I noted, 8 broad points, which I'm not getting into right now. We have a very, very rich panel, and the fun of getting such panels together is that from organizers you start getting slips on time management. So I'm told that we need to close by 6:30, and I would request all the panelists to help me manage time. As sort of indicated, 4 to 5 minutes for each panelist would be very meaningful. Let me begin with Devjani, who has already been introduced to all of you, I think, at different points in the day. She has been leading NESCOM and also one of them, I would say, a public intellectual who has been thinking in terms of how the public-private participation in management of new technologies is addressed. I had opportunity of interacting in Niti Aayog's meetings with her, and the whole idea in terms of how we bring in technologies in underserved regions is something, Devjani, that I think in context of AI is extremely important. As we heard in the opening remarks by Shri Sushil Pal, the issue of Global South's participation and their ability, the enabling part of it that is required, is important. We also heard our colleague from Ministry of External Affairs, Mr. Rohit Ratish, in terms of he suggesting a task force of bringing people together. How you see some of these points that have emerged from the initial remarks and the opening address today in terms of partnership between public sector and private sector? And then over to you.
Thank you, Sachin. As I said this morning in the opening ceremony, this is a very interesting time in the AI world because there are literally two parallel universes coexisting. There are two, as I call them, two truths that's coexisting, right? One truth is AI is absolutely transformative. All of you talked about it, and it's great. And the second truth is that we have still not seen what is the big problem that AI will solve and at scale. Right? There's a lot of debate. Is this, especially given the amount of money that is being invested in AI? I think people are now waking up to what problem will this really solve? There are examples, there are very good examples in healthcare, drug discovery, etc. But again, where we see the biggest challenge or roadblock is how do you apply those at scale? How do you ensure that everyone and every country benefits from it? Which is where the AI narrative breaks today, right? Now, I think this is a beautiful opportunity and a very timely opportunity for India and the Global South, because we have had the experience and we have demonstrated population level scale of technologies using some basic simple principles, and I'm talking about DPIs, right? And I think this is a fantastic opportunity for the Global South to come together to really focus on how do we make or focus on the applied AI challenge. How do we make AI real? How do we make AI work for us? What problems do we get it to solve at scale? And I think this is a fantastic opportunity for the Global South. To do this, there are a few things that we really have to get very serious about, whether it's a task force or whatever, but what matters is the outcome. One, we need enough patient capital in this region, which today does not exist. Whether it is to go and build the kind of compute that is needed or invest in deep tech, this region is starved for patient capital. How do we come together to build capital? Because that's something that often doesn't get talked about. We have to improve the talent density in this region. It is not just about upskilling and reskilling people and creating talent. Most of the good ones will go. And they will build the AI solutions, but they will build them somewhere else. We have to build talent density. We have to skill and we have to retain. And if possible, get people back. Because a lot of people working on AI in whichever part of the world are from our country. So how do we get them back? Third one, we talked about data. It's not just we are sitting on hordes of data, but how do we unlock the data? How do we provide access to data? And I think, when you're talking about applied AI, what you are looking at is, and where the opportunity is how do you use domain specific, take the data from a particular domain, and how do you build those vertical solutions? It pretty much built on what DPI did. DPI solved specific problems. There were horizontal building blocks, KYC, digital identity, or whatever, the interoperability protocol. There were horizontal building blocks. But then what it did beautifully, and why it scaled so beautifully, is because it went after one specific problem. And I think that's the model we have to apply when we are thinking about applied AI, is where we really go domain by domain. And therefore, thinking of data from that perspective, that lens, is going to be very useful. And last but not the least is, how do you create an environment for innovation? I'm sort of tired of everyone talking about regulation, but what are you going to regulate? We are still so early in the AI journey. What are we going to regulate? Whatever we are going to regulate today, we are going to be back at the table a few years down saying we have to change everything. Okay, so how do we instead look at creating an ecosystem, an environment where innovation thrives with ethics? Ethics is going to be a game changer with ethics. And therefore, my last point is, I think the role that, and I sort of really hope to see India play this role, but the role that I think India and Global South will have to play is bring the human accountability and responsibility back in the game. Somewhere in the AI narrative in the Western world, we have started believing that humans are not going to be important anymore in the game of AI. And I think we have to change that narrative completely. There's a lot of talk about putting humans in the loop, in the AI loop. I believe we have to change that, and we have to figure out how to put AI in the human loop. And it's about human centricity and putting humans first. So those are the few points.
For bringing forward the point of ethics. And I think this is so much important now for us. As you may recall, some of us who have been tracking evolution of technology, I'm thrown back in 1999 when I was tracking biotechnology. And we compared a volume that my institute did back in 1986. And it was a hefty volume listing possible dangers of biotechnology. And then we revisited in 2006-07, and I was part of NESTI of OECD. And 2001 and 2, we produced a volume as to what were the dangers people saw from biotechnology and how many of them materialized. The only challenge we got from none other than country like China. In 2018-19, they produced the biggest challenge in terms of violation of ethics, and that was in form of synthetic babies, the twins which came out. And the genetic manipulation that was done for those babies was, amazing, that they would never get cold and they would never have a jaundice. So with that, those synthetic babies now are 3 years old. And this is where the world outcry was there in terms of ethics and what you very beautifully said, human accountability. So I think ethics is something that we need to emphasize and we need to bring back in the governance of technology. UNESCO is doing, and I understand that the G7 presidency of Canada next year has already chosen governance of AI as sort of thematic focus for G7 presidency. But you're absolutely right. Let me now bring in somebody who has been handling science, technology, innovation for some time at OECD. And as I think our opening address by Mr. Sushil Pal very rightly said, democratization of technology and bringing in inclusivity, what we heard from Devjani in terms of human accountability. I wonder how OECD looks at it in terms of science policy, Mr. Jerry Shine, and how you see the possibility of having some sort of task force, which Mr. Rohit Ratish mentioned, of a multi-stakeholder, which was also emphasized. So over to you, and as I mentioned, 4 to 5 minutes.
There we go. Thank you. Well, I think with that introduction, with the range of topics, it's good to remind me to try to keep to 4 or 5 minutes, because I think there's very much we can say on a number of those directions. Let me just start. I mean, to say what I'll talk about is maybe turning the title around a little bit too. What we can do about global partnerships to advance on collaborative AI. And I think, to that note, you're all familiar with the global partnership on AI. The role that India has had in the partnership over the last year and coming into the next year, and the focus that it has placed on trying to be a gateway to the global south in terms of inclusion and inclusivity on these issues. And I think that's to be admired and is widely recognized. What we've been discussing today are ways to sort of build and strengthen the GPAI, the Global Partnership on AI, through an even closer integration with the work that we do on AI at the OECD. So what this means is a so-called integrated partnership that would bring together all of the 38 OECD member countries with the 6 non-OECD members, the other GPAI members, into an integrated partnership. That means we'd have 44 countries of a fairly broad and diverse economic and development footing, working together on equal footing in an inclusive framework to help us try to advance. And I will say advance, because we need to do more on AI, but to do it in a way that's safe, secure, and trustworthy. So we have countries now. India is part of this, of course, Argentina, Brazil, Serbia, Senegal, Singapore, plus the 38 OECD countries that will be working together, and with an ambition to expand that inclusivity, to bring more countries around tables like this. They'll have to be even larger than this as we go forward, because there is an ambition of trying to grow that, to bring in more diverse perspectives from countries who, to different degrees, do have a shared commitment and are facing some very shared challenges. I mean, those that you highlight, with AI developments being very much centered in a few countries, many other countries are looking for ways that they can get more engaged in AI developments and how they can benefit from it, not just as consumers, but as producers as well. I think the partnership, too, is important because it brings together not just policymakers around the table, but it has the so-called expert groups, right? So we bring together multi-stakeholder, multi-dimensional expert groups that have been operating under GPAI. I think I heard a number today. There are 250 experts in various domains that have been working on projects to help understand how to improve the development of AI and how to inform development of AI that is more safe and is more transparent and explanatory. We at OECD have also had a network of experts. It's been about 400, 500 people who've been working together now. We're going to combine these so that we can have experts who are working in response to the policy needs and who can then better inform policymakers about successful policies that we can try to implement to promote development of AI in ways that will be used for human good and to bring good to all. I think in that model too, we look at some of the other resources that are available, right? So we've been developing over the last several years the so-called AI Policy Observatory, which brings together information on AI data, on trends, job trends, venture capital investments, and so forth. And maybe more importantly, for those who are trying to make progress in the space of AI policy and AI governance, information from more than 70 different jurisdictions, more than 1,000 different policy initiatives, some of which are broad about national strategies for AI, and some very targeted toward the very applications that you were just mentioning. How do we have safe and secure AI in health and healthcare? How do we use AI to advance sustainable development, sustainable agriculture? So I think the inclusivity of that resource as well is something that can inform policy developments in a number of countries, as can a set of tools and a catalog of tools that we've been developing primarily for policymakers to help understand the distinctions between different types of AI, the benefits that they can bring, the risks that they pose. There's a difference between the face recognition that's used here to let me get into my iPhone and the generative AI that's captured the public attention, right? So we know that AI tools have been embedded in virtually all of our digital infrastructures these days. And how do we understand what the risks and benefits of those are so that we can take appropriate and proper policy measures? I would say, again, just to reinforce the notions you've been looking at, we've been looking at how, from a country level down to the level of individual firms, how do we see the most positive and productivity benefits from AI adoption and use? And we have found it is very much, and we have now some evidence to back this up, very much tied to the availability of skills, the availability of compute, the availability of data and accessible data, which itself, like AI, we need to take steps that both promote and encourage the accessibility and the availability of data and put it in forms that can be readily used, while at the same time respecting privacy concerns and other security concerns around those data to make sure that they are used with trust. So aligns with one other, and I'll end on this note, one other initiative that we have launched at OECD now, which is related to data free flows with trust, or DFFT, which is trying to look at broadly and in individual sectors, how do you encourage greater data access and accessibility and use, while at the same time ensuring that the trustworthiness there and the protections are there so it can be used in appropriate ways. Of course, we know that those data can be used also for training AI systems as well as a range of other applications. So I think the two of these go together and will give us a good policy front on which to work forward. As I said in the beginning, with a more inclusive set of countries around the table and with a growing set of experts helping to inform and advise the policymaking community. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Jerry. I think you have rightly emphasized in terms of bringing multi-stakeholder partnership that OECD has already tried, and the group that you alluded to probably, I think, would help in terms of taking this forward. Let me now bring in the other side of the table and bring in people who have been upfront in terms of addressing this from the private sector, from in Mobib. Shubi, you have been addressing this issue in terms of how you look at these partnerships, how what Debjani said is too early to bring in regulation, and how you see the opportunities that Jerry was referring to. So Dr. Shubi Chaturvedi, over to you.
Thank you so much, Sachin, and thank you, Sushilji and Rohit, for laying out the framework and the context. We're often laying out the point of being in a room full of white, male, European perspectives. So you've been very brave, Jerry. We also want to thank you for the work that OECD has been doing. Sushilji, when you started the conversation with multi-stakeholderism, that was truly music to my ears, because it is often, we're speaking to the converted, and there are often voices in the room which are not present. So when we look at anything which is being done with a public policy lens, it's usually for public good, in public interest, and after public consultation. So many congratulations to Government of India, MeitY, as well as MEA for putting together a very robust set of people in the room so that voices are not being left out. In Mobi, started in 2008, by 2011, we were India's first unicorn when it was not a buzzword. Not only did we start as a startup, 4 young boys from Uttar Pradesh. If Uttar Pradesh was a country, it would be the 5th largest country in the world. So we are known for size, seizing every single opportunity, and for disrupting technologies that look at frugal innovation, which is at the heart of everything that we do in India. So when we looked at the topic of the day today, the perspective was, how do you build, how do you solve for developing countries, how do you solve for small island landlocked nations, how do you solve for women and children, because that's what is at stake today. So a lot of work has happened, Sachin, on the areas of internet governance and cybersecurity, where ISTAR organizations have played leading roles, where informal as well as formal processes and voluntary standards have come into place, whether we look at IGF, IETF, ICANN, ITU. And this is so important where AI is today being, and not just Gen AI, because it's often being used synonymously, because it gets a lot of spotlight for the right reasons, has more articulate spokespersons. Very, very important to understand that democratizing AI is not just good ethically, morally, strategically. It is no longer a choice. It's an idea whose time has come. It is an imperative because it also makes economic sense. So there are various statistics and reports that our friends at PwC and the World Bank have already put out. Every 2% increase in just broadband, leads to about 2% increase to the economy and GDP. For countries like India and the global south, this is a direct impact on not just job creation, but also job transformation. So good for business, good for people, very, very important now to look at it with a solutions approach. We believe that if there is government engagement, and that's the core principle of multi-stakeholderism, where not just government, civil society, media, academia, industry, everybody has a voice, but to make this equitable, we have to ensure that there's open access, there's equity in participation, there is an active effort on the part of global governments to make sure that you're in the room. And that has been my personal journey, where you looked at the multi-stakeholder advisory group of the United Nations Secretary General. I had the fortune of being backed by both ISOC and Government of India's NIXI, which is the .in registry. I still had to stay in a red light area because we couldn't afford hotel rooms in Geneva. So if you're not in the room, if you're not at the table, you're going to be on the menu. So one, not just producers of AI, not just consumers of AI, now you have startups, entrepreneurs, you have people who are challenging status quo, specifically for emerging countries, developing economies, future technologies. Law is always going to be playing catch up to policy. So when we look at NIST standards, when we look at the work that the OECD does, it informs a lot of conversations. However, realizing that there is no blanket one-size-fits-all solution, and here are some of the recommendations as to how we take this forward. Rohitji, stemming from your conversation, can we look at a task force? So we believe at least 3 or 4 actionables, and this is where I'd like to end and yield my time. So one is creating an actionable roadmap for democratizing AI resources. And that's why I think India's AI mission will play a huge role, because not just access to quality data, data poisoning is as real an issue. So if we can look at liberating data in the areas of regulatory sandboxes, trusted green corridors, just the way we've done for manufacturing and electronics, if we can do that for digital services, so that startups can innovate and build, especially in the areas of health tech and AI, that's an opportunity right there. Because when we learn and when we see businesses and startups collaborate, that's when the real value will get unlocked. There are only so many times that global governments can bring together everybody, get them in a room, get a venue such as this in the heart of Delhi. So this connect then becomes organic. Then under the US-India CEO Forum, India and US are already collaborating. They've set up an initiative called NIHIT, which is a knowledge network. And even for unlocking global trade, we realized that both AI, cybersecurity, skilling, which is the real gap in terms of talent, and that has to translate in training the trainers, ensuring that NVIDIA, AMDs of the world are bridging our course curriculum. So even when we're looking at engineers from electronics and VLSI, they're not really ready for AI. It's not just compute. What do we teach? Are we making sure that our curriculum is updated? And that's where a joint resource center, online collaboratory, just in the models that we've used for digital diplomacy and decentralized models of internet governance, they bring in and unlock the real value of multi-stakeholderism. And AI data commons is something that we'd like to propose, because when you look at questions of jurisprudence, a lot of people have tried looking at a global model for internet governance and cybersecurity, taking it to The Hague hasn't worked. So multilateral collaboration where it comes to sovereignty, where it comes to legal issues, where it comes to national security, has to rest with the government, where MLATs are going to be a much easier solution. But when it comes to creating the value of data and AI data commons, which allows for global researchers to create a repository, becomes an accessible program. A very, very strong appeal to governments worldwide to create a global AI fellowship. We heard that there is a similar attempt being made by Government of India, where some fellows have been invited to this edition, but this has to be a continuing program, where you're able to bring in younger voices and create the next generation of leaders for AI leadership. Believe me, from the time that we've come in, 20,000 people have come online already. So not only do we want to bring new people online, we want to make sure they have an experience that's safe, trusted, and that makes sure they're able to use this amazing tool for not just disruption, but also innovation. And lastly, AI for good and establishing AI ethical standards. So while regulation, and I wholeheartedly echo what Devjani said, let us not put the cart before the horse. We are not saying we want a wild, wild west, a lawless, framework-less ecosystem for innovation, but it's equally important that we do not stifle innovation. Now is the time for AI proliferation. So from a private sector, industry perspective, where a lot of heavy investment decisions get taken, where we make presentations to our boards and they approve investments, stability of policy, a light touch governance framework, and a collaborative approach where we do this very often and not as a, let's say, a bi-yearly exercise would be some of the submissions from the lens of the private sector, a former academician and a civil society member and a teacher at heart. Thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, Shubhi, for bringing forward ideas which would help in terms of turning some of our understanding on governance component into practical action. So thanks for your intervention. Let me now turn back to Mr. Anirudh Suri, with whom India Internet Fund and couple of other initiatives in this sector have prospered very well. You have been somebody who has seen this dichotomy of producers and consumers of AI, and that dichotomy is far more challenging for the global south. And I was wondering how you see the suggestions that have already come up in terms of taking the idea forward in terms of at least coherence and understanding the idea of ethics and their centrality, but also this dichotomy of producers and consumers. So over to you, Mr. Suri.
Thank you so much, Sachin, and thank you to everyone who's shared inputs before I share some of my thoughts. I'll make one big point and then I'll build on that over the next 3-4 minutes. I think, much like Devjani, you said that there's no point regulating a technology that is so fast evolving that you'll find yourself probably on the wrong side sooner than later. I think as far as governance is concerned, promoting fair, inclusive use of AI is concerned, I think unless countries in the global south build competitiveness in AI, there's no point in talking too much about it, because you won't have a seat at the table unless you are bringing something to the table as far as competitiveness in AI is concerned. So I think that's the first big point I want to put out. And this is basis, I think, everyone's experience, whether you see it in the consumer internet space. I think, as Sushilji, you also said that there are many pieces of the internet governance puzzle that we are not part of, not on the table for. And one of the reasons for that is you didn't have the internet-driven competitiveness and capabilities early enough. And I think we can talk till the cows literally come home about regulation and how much we want ethics to be part of the governance and how much we want the global south to be at the table, how our problems need to be solved using AI also, and not just the problems faced by the developed world. But I think none of that will realistically happen unless we've built competitiveness in this space, not just as India, but I believe as the global south, so that we are not left behind in yet another revolution as we were in the industrial revolution and earlier revolutions. So now with that main point, I'll break that down along the 5 or 6, I would say, building blocks of AI competitiveness, some of which I think have already been laid out. Compute is obviously the one that has been talked about the most in the last couple of years, and I think I'll defer to Vishal, I think Jaya, and Annabelle. I think you three represent companies that are at the forefront of compute, either in terms of the hardware or cloud computing for AI applications, AI researchers. So I think I'll leave it to you to share some thoughts on how this doesn't become a very concentrated play, and that access is available much more broadly and more affordably to researchers, to entrepreneurs, to students in the global south. I think that's a key responsibility I would lay at the on the feet or the hands of the companies that currently today have that hardware and cloud computing power. I do believe that a lot of that compute power has to be provided early on to labs in countries like India and other countries in the global south, to research institutions, not just the IITs, but the IIScs and AIMS and other educational research institutions across the global south, to entrepreneurs, to startups, I think at more affordable rates, so they don't get locked out and this doesn't become just a pure big tech driven game. Of course, from a funding standpoint, I think to the extent that the governments in the global south can provide resources to help alleviate some of that cost that obviously companies like NVIDIA would need to incur to provide some of this compute. I think that's a key part, but it shouldn't be just a government-driven effort, I believe. I think large private sector firms from within India and the global south should play a role, whether it's IT services firms, whether we have large conglomerates in India, I think that should step up. I believe there are news articles I've seen of partnerships between NVIDIA and, let's say, Reliance or Tata to provide cloud computing access in India. I would love to hear more about that, Vishal, maybe from you. So I think compute is one key puzzle of the competitiveness puzzle. The other piece which is related to this is the R&D piece. I think unlike the internet wave, I think to do anything meaningful in AI, you'll need research. There's a certain large amount of research that's being done, obviously in Silicon Valley, in China, in Europe. I think India is lagging on that. The global south broadly is lagging on that. And I think one of the key reasons for that, there are 2 or 3 key reasons I see in that. One is just access to compute. Instead of distributing compute across a lot, like in a very socialist way, I think we should focus on centers of excellence, concentrate some of that compute access to certain institutions or certain groups that have proven their mettle in being able to use that effectively, use that compute effectively. I think the second piece, I think Debjani, you pointed to, talent from the global south often goes to Silicon Valley, often. And I think that's a problem we've got to solve if we want to do great R&D here. As you rightly mentioned, many of the researchers who did the famous Google paper were of Indian origin. Many of the researchers today sitting in, the OpenAIs of the world are of Indian origin, and I can extend that to global south origin. We've got to find ways to bring them back. For that, I think, again, building the right innovation ecosystems in our universities, in private and maybe government collaborated labs, like the Los Alamos type labs, I think have to be built in the global south as well. And that's a key component of building competitiveness and also making sure that we solve problems that are our problems. Otherwise, I think any country naturally will solve problems that are front and center for them. For the US, it's labor replacing applications of AI that are paramount, because for them, labor is a shortage. For us, labor is in abundance. We've got to find labor-enhancing technologies that we emphasize in our R&D. Talent I've spoken about, but that talent piece is going to be a key element of competitiveness for the global south. I think data, people have spoken about both the data commons, data freer data flows. I will add just one point on the data piece. I think whether we get global AI governance agreements or not on data ownership, data IP, I think we need, as a global south, need to build more movement around making sure that data is just not used without any regulation, without any ownership rights being afforded to those who've developed them. And that ultimately, if we get the data, the R&D, the compute and the talent pieces right, get these 4 building blocks right in the global south, then I think we'll naturally see the applications coming out of them, because we have enough entrepreneurs, enough venture capital here. And to me, if we get these 4 or 5 blocks right, then I think we will make sure that we are at the table when it comes to governance, and also ensure that it's human-driven AI and globally inclusive AI.
Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Suri. You have already passed on the baton to Mr. Vishal Dhupar, and and I think he has already said what you need to speak. So you have some points to respond to in your 4 or 5 minutes that are there. So over to you, Mr. Dhupar.
So I think what Anirudh has said, I can obviously answer it by Q&A. Or I can alternatively speak like an observer of India, listening to all of you. I'll probably do the latter. As an observer, it's crystal clear to us that we are trying to establish 2 possibilities. Firstly, the gateway to global south, and secondly, learn from global north. Obviously, we realize there's a lot of work that has been done in global north, which is going to be impacting this very big change that ought to happen. I think the debate around it, whether it'll happen or not happen, is over. It ought to happen. When it happens is just a question. What is this change? For the very first time in last 15 years of our entire human history, a brand new categories got formed. 15 years back, we said, we have now come to a realization that we can augment the work of our software engineers. It meant music for Indians, because if you can augment the work of your software engineers, it basically means you can be more productive, you can now improve the economies not only of your country but globally. Through that journey, which was a journey of understanding how do you classify things, how do you find out in that messy data, more difficulties, more noise, and translate that, a lot of good things happen, and the world, which was the global north, figured out, hey, I have to overcome those challenges. And it took you, because of scaling laws, to a place where augmentation of humanity is upon us. And the augmentation of humanity is upon us in the natural language that we speak. Now, a lot of people get confused about large language model means the language you and I speak. That language is meant for us to speak to the computer so that we can teach the computer. But what the computer is doing for us is that it's actually telling us the meaning of all mega challenges, grand challenges that we are facing, the unraveling of the world. Take an example. Just like you're talking about governance, we are also talking about climate change. If I have to understand climate change, it would take me the entire computing the world has to get you to 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer resolution to tell you that this afternoon in Pragati Maidan what's going to happen. And we can't afford that. But because of this augmentation that is taking place, I can predict for 1 pixel, which is the floating point, I can predict another 64 and compress that information. Now the big question is, what is in for India? And in for India is 3 things. Firstly, the method, which is the know-how, and we have this know-how pretty much through the culture of our history. The nuances, the sensibilities that we have in our culture is our culture. That's the difference. That's why we are different. Yes, we go across the globe transparently and we help the world at large, but we are different. And that needs to move into codification. The algorithm and compute needs to be put into play. How will we put that into play? Only if we have a grand vision. Now, we're all talking about humans because it impacts us. What is 2 dearest things to any human? To be safe, right? To be safe and healthy. Now, if we decide that there are 2 mega challenges in India that also support global south about safety and health, I think we got to put our stake in the ground. Because an enterprising vision will attract the researchers. We did that with Aadhaar because Aadhaar was not treated as identity. Aadhaar was treated as a root cause to solve the problem of a prepaid economy to a postpaid economy. And we started opening the line. So similarly, if our vision is clear, safe human, a healthy human, increases an economy, then let's sign it up and attract those researchers. But getting researchers alone based on vision is not going to help unless we give them the tool to do the work. Now, why is that tool important? Because when they will put it into deployment in India for India's gain, there'll be dimensions of problems that will emerge. Learnings will be different. And that's what you're talking about, taking to global south and contributing. When we did the UPI part, and why the chaiwala in Nariman Point is no more interested in cash but asking you that just transfer money so that he saves time going to the bank, and instead of wasting the time of putting his money back, he's able to make more money there. Similarly, those will be the learnings that will come from scale. And we will be able to then participate with the global nod to say, hey, these are my unique problems. And we will, because that's the history of our country, will figure out that within those constraints, how do we solve that? And that combination of coming with North and South together will help you to adjust. What Devjani rightfully said, that look, you want to talk about regulations, let's talk. Make it baseline. Let's pay attention to what the world is doing. Absolutely do that. But then you'll have to bring onto the table on precise thing what is impacting you. Your language is different. The world says that, look, I have now taken the language, broken that into tokens, I'm putting those tokens into compute, and the compute is basically bringing the intelligence, but your words are different. Your structure is different. So we need to basically start from there, and that will help a lot of people doing it. I see you telling me to hurry up. So in nutshell, I think it's an ability to bring the vision followed by compute, the know-how is available, apply it, and hopefully we have a reason to prosper together.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks a lot. I think you have clarified this cluttered vision that was emerging in terms of how we go forward. In a way, if I can capture it, you said South should set its own agenda. We should set our own priorities based on our requirements. And that's exactly based on our experiences and our insights. So let me bring this next to you, Jaya, in terms of how you look at the task that already Mr. Suri has mentioned in terms of how you define it. But as you heard Mr. Duper taking that element of endogeneity based on our own experiences, how you see this question?
So, the transformational and pervasive nature of this new technology that we're all talking about makes partnerships and how we come together, collaboration, a key element to how we progress or, how we go forward with including the entire world with us. So there are a few requirements that AI has. Of course, one is compute, and no one can ignore that, as Anirudh, you rightly pointed. I mean, this is one of the key criteria or requirements for AI advancement. And of course, compute, when we talk about compute, it is an expensive affair. I mean, when you look at the pyramid of industries, the top ones can, of course, afford the compute infrastructure that's needed for development. But who gets left behind are the small and mid-level industries that need that collaboration and help, either from the government that can invest in more infrastructure and hand it over for developers. And also, we have to move towards open and collaborative platforms, open source platforms that will aid the developers to really innovate and learn and develop. And the other key part is talent, right? India especially has a vibrant talent pool, and we have about more than 500,000 engineers graduating year on year. But the key is, how do we convert this raw talent that's coming out of schools to skilled labor that is required by the industry? So there's a lot of good work that has happened, but more is yet to come, because AI is something that we're all learning together. So academia partnerships with government and industry becomes key to this. I mean, India truly has the potential to not just meet our own demands, but to supply talent to the entire world. And the other one is startups. I mean, we can't ignore the roles of startups, especially in an innovating new technology or environment that we have. So startups also need similar help, and this is where MNCs who have already established and have the skills can really help with some joint partnerships with some startups. And the last but not the least is a global partnership to define a framework that we all believe in and are committed to for using AI in a very responsible, safe, and ethical way. I think all of these are very key for us to take AI forward for the benefit of humanity. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for very, very precise and very impactful intervention, I would say, Jaya, in terms of the challenges of our collective learning that you have highlighted. I think this is very important. Let me now turn to Microsoft and to Kalika, to you. In terms of what limitations we see in terms of scalability, something that people have been referring to time and again, and from the position that you are in, you must have seen the kind of limitations which are there. How we see the AI revolution which Jaya just mentioned in terms of we all learning together, but then what are the challenges, and within the global south context, what kind of options you see in terms of overcoming this?
So I will speak as a global South citizen and not as a Microsoft, person. Though obviously each is influenced by the other, and I agree with a lot of things that people have mentioned here. But most of all, I actually agree with Mr. Dhupa, because I think that in our hurry to kind of ride this AI wave, we are missing the fact that there are things that we can set as our own agenda. No, if we think about DPIs and DPGs, and we give Aadhaar as an example all the time, right? We didn't need any competitiveness with the rest of the world to implement a system which proved to be so successful that the world comes and talks to us, right? And here we do have an opportunity to do that. We talk about democratization, and I see, like, the people here, including myself, I'm a technologist as well, we talk it from the point of view of the technologist. So we are talking about startups, we are talking about, industry, we are talking about how to build skilled labor for the industry, for AI. We're not talking about the people who are going to use the services and the applied AI, outcomes here. I believe we are right now in a very, very unique position, that the first time ever in the history of technology that we in the global south have the opportunity to set the agenda for a technology that's transformative. Okay? So it hasn't happened before. We've never had a seat on the table. We might not have a full seat on the table, I believe we do, but we have at least a partial seat on the table, and we can, put forward our point of view. We have the opportunity to make lives easier, to actually decrease inequity in the global south with the help of this technology. And that is something we really need to put on the table and make others think about. So when we talk about, say, harm and bias mitigation and all these kind of things, and we talk about socio-technical AI development, it's absolutely clear to us who work in this area that current methods, current data sets, current systems that are available do not work for us in the global south, right? So we should push forward for a more multilingual, multicultural, approach or a framework to look at all these things, right? And it can't be a unicultural and just a single language thing. The other thing I have to say about the regulation is that while it might be too early to regulate things, I have seen regulation also work as spurring innovation. Now, for a lot of us who remember this, as machine learning, a lot of us started as machine learning, scientists or researchers or engineers. In machine learning, our biggest issue was when enterprises and other organizations came and said, we can't let you see our data, but build this for us, right? And there was an uproar. What do they expect us to do? How can we do anything without looking at the data? They won't even let us look at the data. Very soon, we came up with ways to look at eyes of mechanisms to use the data to build the models that were actually useful. So I think if there are, you have to kind of pay attention to what regulations make sense and what regulations do not make sense. So there can be regulations which spur innovation, which allow people to think differently because they cannot do it in a very straightforward, let's go ahead with this and jump into the bandwagon kind of a way, right? So I believe that is another thing. The limitations right now that I see, to answer your question directly, and that's the last thing I'll say, is to do with what everyone has said, data being available, right? Also to do with the fact that doing AI building, inference, everything costs a lot of money. And who is the person who's going to bear the cost of this? And to come back to the competitiveness of it, which commercial entity will bear a major cost if they're not going to be able to get any return on investment? So we have not been able to articulate that other than social good, which a commercial entity is not interested in social good, right? That's not their responsibility. The government is responsible for the social good and the welfare of the citizens. So how do we articulate what the return on investment for a commercial entity is going to be? And I would just like to end with one thing, which is about replacement of jobs. And I'm sorry, I'm taking liberties with Henry Ford's example of, if everyone has ridden on a horse cart, it's hard for them to imagine what a car can bring to them and what are the harms and the positive aspects of a car. So taking that as an example, if we are going to replace, say, wheel makers, inns where horses are fed, the fodder for the horses, then we have to right now start imagining who are the mechanics, where are we going to get the components and the parts of the automobile. So all that has to be imagined now, and now is the time. And it's actually exciting because here are we, all of us, talking about this. This has never happened right at the start of a technological wave that we get together and do this. So I'll just stop here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Kalika, for bringing forward several important points, and plurality. Your emphasis on plurality, I think, is extremely important. The idea of multilingual, multicultural dimensions to be factored in, and then, of course, your response in terms of a replacement of jobs. So this, I think, those who are grappling with waves of technology, particularly the frontier technologies, are very well sort of aware of that. So let me now turn to Annabelle Lee. You have been sort of concerned in terms of the AI human resource ecosystem, or issues that you think are important that we heard just now from the Global South, the limitations of the skill, how we see those skill limitations. So any perspectives that you want to share with us in 4 to 5 minutes?
I hope I can be heard now. Great. I'll try and be quick because we've lost some time to technology issues, which is part of, I guess, the conversation we're having here today. So I actually wear the head of Southeast Asia public policy for Amazon Web Services on top of the digital policy file, which I hold. And so I will be looking at this perspective from the global south, but beyond India as well. And I think a lot of what was said today at the roundtable really resonated with a lot of our lived experiences, being a technology service provider, working very closely with startups, with SMBs, and with governments all across global south countries. When I take a step back and think about AI, and specifically as well generative AI, and the kind of potential it can have for the global south countries, I think it truly is a leapfrog opportunity of one. Maybe we have, the last time we saw this scale is mobile phones and mobile connectivity. something else has come on. Okay. And from my perspective, I think that I will start there in terms of when we talk about access. We forget that not only do we need compute, we still do need networking. And in fact, I will go as far to say is that compute is available, and as cloud service providers, as hyperscale cloud service providers, what we do every single day is make that compute available, and that includes for AI. And so a lot of our startups are able to come on board very quickly at a relatively low cost to train, fine-tune, and deploy AI technology. So this is available regardless of where you are based. You could be based in Mongolia. You could be based in, Uzbekistan. You could be based in India, right? And we have, as long as you have internet connectivity, you will be able to access the cloud. So that's the good news. But the bad news is that I think internet connectivity is still not available everywhere. So until we solve that first problem, and I know it's a difficult problem, we do have low Earth orbit satellites coming in and all of that might help to bridge that gap. But I think we will still have an access issue. But the good news is that that access is not strictly on compute. I think the second piece that we've been talking a lot about is skills. When we look at the skills issue, I think generative AI in particular has done something truly amazing. Now, I'm just going to give an example. I'm not a technologist. I'm a social scientist. I have no idea how to code. There are probably people at this table who, are geniuses compared to me in terms of like using a computer. But the technology of generative AI has enabled people like me to be able to build an application with natural language. And so just to use AWS's services for an example, there's this thing called Party Rock. I don't know why we called it that. It's not very intuitive in terms of naming convention, but it enables you to, as an individual who only speaks, normal languages, to be able to type into the service an application you would like to build, and the generative AI can actually build it for you. So that really does, when you think about democratization, that democratizes the technology to a whole different level, right? And it means that it can augment you at different levels. If you are a computer scientist, if you're a software developer, but you're not an AI scientist, there are technologies today that will help you be more of an AI scientist. But if you are, a common person like me with zero coding skills, you can somehow build an application as well. So I think the key is to ensure that we get the trainings and skills that are needed, at whatever layer, out to as many people as possible. And today we've already done, as AWS, I think a lot of other companies at this table also have similar things, a lot of free skills training that exists. The interesting thing, and it's also existing in many different languages, by the way, but the interesting thing we've seen is making it known to the people on the ground who could benefit most. And I think that is something that, the global south, if you want to think about agenda setting, how do we use ways and means already existing in different countries to get the reach further out? So I think that's the second piece on skills. And finally, when we talk about, and I'm going to use this, I think speed is another very critical piece for the global south. Why do I say this? Because with every new technology revolution, and we are right now in one, if you move faster, you have first mover advantage. I think we're at the stage where it's kind of a equal playing field for most users and developers of AI today. But if we do not, as the global south, think about how do we ensure that policies and kind of government support is enabling that speed to happen, we could fall behind again. And so maybe the last thing I want to say is that when we think about speed, I think the most important thing here is not to reinvent the wheel too much. Look at what exists today already: compute, networking, power, the skills, finding the right mechanisms, whether that is through platforms like UNSCAP, who we've been working with as well, some of the development banks, ADB, the World Bank, the Global Partnership on AI, finding these organizations that already exist and ensuring that we're putting the programs through them. And I think, candidly speaking, from the private sector's perspective, we can be a bit more organized. I think that's maybe the problem. We've been very ad hoc in terms of our approach. If we see a program, we try and put it in, but we're not really thinking what can we do at scale. So I'll put forward that these are the main things that have to be on the agenda. And a final last data point I want to just show to make everybody think about how it is actually possible to get things done quickly today is the example of Sea Lion. I don't know if anybody has heard of Sea Lion. This is the Southeast Asian, so ASEAN, the institution, is building a large language model, and it is intended to be a large language model for commonly used Southeast Asian languages. And this includes Thai, includes Bahasa Indonesia, Bahasa Melayu. This is already being built. And AWS is working with them to build this. But more importantly, I think we were able to do this with them very quickly. So it's about ensuring that you're building that LLM if you want one, finding the right fund sources, and in a lot of cases we do co-fund as well, to make sure that we're actually going to enable that first piece, so that very, very quickly your startups, your government agencies have a really good fine-tuned large language model that you can use. And that's just an example, but I want to inspire everybody, because I felt it was getting a bit of a downer, like there were so many problems we're trying to solve. I do genuinely believe a lot of this is solvable, so thank you very much, and let's put all of this on the agenda.
Thank you. Thanks, Annabelle Lee. I think you're absolutely right with your reference to first mover advantage. And I think the whole literature that came up in profession of economics about catching up and falling behind is something which is, with this technology at least, is playing out in a very different way. Good that you mentioned about the regional initiative from ASEAN in terms of its governance and also enabling countries to participate. So thanks, Annabelle. Let me now invite our colleague Matthew to you in terms of how you look at this implementation and high impact AI projects that you think Global South may think of. So over to you, next 4 or 5 minutes.
Thank you. I'll try to be brief because I know we're a bit over time. But I'll start with a question, is that we're all talking about solutions and ways we feel we're capable of enabling AI to be accessible and to be democratized. But I think that, we have 3 of the biggest like tech companies are on the table and a few government representatives. And my question is, how come we all agree on the ways to do it, and those solutions are actually not implemented? So I think there's a problem regarding political willingness, maybe. But the question of inclusivity of Global South is a very important one, because they might be the most affected population of this transition that is promising to increase productivity and automate a lot of jobs. And it's a complicated one as well, because our role as rich countries is not to bring their voice to the table, but rather to support them to bring their own voice in the global AI discussions. We cannot be the bearer. They know what they need. They know what needs to be addressed and changed. But the problem is that for most of those countries, there is a very limited ecosystem for them to actually be able to use the opportunity that we are trying to bring. Open science, open source, and access to AI programming tools is great, but if you don't have the capacity to use those opportunities to create the positive impact we're looking for, it's of little use. So we need also to invest and support developing countries in creating their own ecosystems. Previous speakers have already talked about this, so I won't get over it again, but that comes through education, upskilling, and capacity building. Our approach at CEMIA is to have, to develop initiative with local stakeholders as lead of every initiative we are supporting in developing countries. We want to use AI to address real challenges faced in developing countries, but to do so, we need to work with people that are living these issues, that have a foot on the ground. So what we decided to do is to do this by building on the microcredit initiative. So with people in those specific countries, we identify challenges that can be addressed with AI, and create micro AI projects that can ideally be afterward be implemented and then scaled up to other regions or other countries. But I'll go back to my first editorial note, and maybe I'll throw a brick in the pond here. But There's a lot of talks about democratization and global collaboration, but in reality, everybody is actually trying to pull on their side of the sheets because there is so much attention and money in play. I mean, we see most regulations being adopted or in the process of being adopted or drafted. They're mostly about regulating the market instead of truly trying to protect the people, and even less about sharing the positive impact. I think that, again, there is a lack of real political willingness because of the premise of wealth creation is putting a lot of pressure on regulators to get the biggest piece of the pie that they can. So as long as we approach, I think that as long as we approach AI regulation as like an economic issue instead of a global social issue, we will miss this opportunity to reduce social gaps and might actually end up widening them. So if we really want to be collaborative and address this issue as a global one, as we should, we need to do everything we can to make sure that the upcoming transition, because there will be a transition, is as smooth as possible and as short as possible.
Thanks, Matthew, for being so precise and clear in terms of what the roadmap should be, something that should be raised in terms of workable roadmap. So I think it's an excellent contribution to that. Rudra, I have been told not to ask any question to you, but I'm so delighted that you are here on this panel. And I think you have been one who has been connecting rise of these technologies and the geopolitics that comes in along with that. It poses several different questions, and I think answers are not simple. As we heard, people who are engaged in technology development, social scientists who are into the role of technology governance and its dissemination, the catching up and the falling behind question. Global South is at multiple levels of development. There is no uniformity. And then we heard Mr. Dhupar mentioning in terms of why it is important to articulate our own difficult situations and our past experiences to see that technology speaks what we have gone through and what we are looking at. How, Rudra, you see this whole question for Global South and what solution you have for us?
I thought you started by saying you're not supposed to ask me a question. I'll just make 2 points. I think one is the point that Devjani made and others alluded. I think in this game I think clarity of purpose is going to be very important. When you're in the valley, I was in OpenAI in the office about a month ago. It's a whole different universe, right? Where we are is a whole different universe. And I think here we really do need to take a leaf off the DPI page of the book. There was a specific problem that was given to a specific group of people to solve. They solved that, which then evolved into other problems that they could attach and reuse and be interoperable and so on and so forth. And I think that's very important. Yesterday I was in a room with 40 Nigerian diplomats. We were talking about AI, and it was interesting. The question they asked is, what is this for? How is this actually going to help us? They asked the same question on space, saying, why do we need to invest in a space program if I'm in Lagos? And they said, what do I need all this compute for? What's it going to solve? And I think that's a really important question from the Global South. The second, I'll just push back a little bit of what kind of Kalika said. I don't think we're setting the agenda. I think we should be clear-eyed about where we are. There are many different conversations happening on AI. Many different agendas are being set right now. I think we could set the agenda. And there's a way in which you could do that collaboratively if you organize this. And Mr. Singh's here, who's put all of this together. So I think the next stage of this is, how do you actually use this to shape the agenda? So take one example. There's a lot of buzz around the Safety Institute process today. It's a serious thing. When it started in Bletchley, people were unsure. When it moved to Korea, it became a very serious thing. So Singh, I think, was at Korea. This is going to proliferate. So can we use this kind of a process to channel the needs of the Global South, as it were, for instance, which has a very different appreciation of privacy and risk, for instance, in situations such as that. And there are any number of other examples, for instance, but I just wanted to bring these 2 points to bear. The last one, just for Jerry, I'll say is, my own sense is we should just be very careful in these collaborative affairs when we think of DFFT, etc. Right? That brings up a whole different can of worms. It's a whole different set of issues. There is no consensus around those issues. And frankly, I think we don't need consensus because everybody's got what they want. I don't think there's a tech company in this room today talking about data localization in India. right? Rewind 2 years ago, very different scene. So I think the way we think of grammar and the way you shape these agendas are going to matter equally. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks, Rudra, for bringing forward the expectations, hopes, and also reservations that several global South countries have in terms of investing and prioritizing within the technology. And let me at this point also acknowledge presence of Mr. Abhishek Singh. Thank you. Thanks for joining in, the additional secretary with MITI, somebody who has been thoroughly engaged in terms of how this trajectory of discussions and ideas around this whole get-together comes in. Maybe should I request you to make some observations and share your perspective before we close?
I'm more in the listening mode than trying to imbibe the wealth of knowledge that exists in this room with the experts on the technology field, as also authors and everyone. And Jerry and Matthew will be there in the discussions all along. So I would prefer to listen more today and maybe discuss over the dinner or something for want of time.
Thank you for joining us today, and good that you are in this room. There are competing commitments here. So I think friends and colleagues, we have already overshot time. Some summary that I was thinking in terms of presenting at the end of the this discussion, thinking in terms of what solutions are there. But as you have heard, Global South is not a homogeneous entity. It's the heterogeneity comes in terms of technology development, in terms of those who are still in the mode of catching up, countries where expectations, capacities, and dimensions of engagement vary, and they are also in terms of how they see the compute capacity, the skills, the budgetary allocations that their governments have to make, even the ability for startup financing that are extremely different. Only a converging point that emerges for the Global South is in terms of their expectation for AI to be safe and trustworthy. And that's where the whole emphasis on ethics lies. So I think some of these dimensions, if at all they go in, what Debjani said in terms of the minimum denominator for governance component. And that's where the dilemma and the challenge lies. But there is also opportunity. And as I gave example of similar reservations which we have seen over last 20 years about biotechnology and frontier technologies per se, there was also huge uproar when we saw convergence of biotech, nanotech, and ICT. You remember the NASTI was constituted in OECD, and we saw a new working party coming up to see convergence of technologies and multiple forms of governance that were there. So I think those of us who are in the field of technology governance and economic development have seen waves of these urges across from different quarters to allow innovation to prevail. Governance to prevail, and there were several Global South countries, Rudra, who opposed inclusion of intellectual property rights back in 94, 95. The whole Uruguay round in WTO has seen assertion by the Global South to see that IPRs are not sweeping. But now you find technical talent within the Global South also urging for intellectual property protection. So those debates and their rise and their fall, we have seen as competitive advantages of countries have changed, economies have changed, and so have their priorities and concerns. But today, where world is converging in terms of AI is in terms of its ethics. And I hope the world work that UNESCO's guidelines have taken forward, what I mentioned in the beginning of the G7 and G20 priorities, the priorities that Mr. Rohit Atish mentioned in terms of public-private partnership, the DPI related issues, but as Kalika very rightly said, more competition, more skills, and that's where the dimension is. I fully agree with Mr. Dupayu in terms of we bringing forward our own expectations, articulation of our past and our value systems. And that's what I think imbibe within the technology's language that we expect it to speak. So with that, I thank all of our panelists. Big hand for them for their contribution. Excellent opening remarks and the initial remarks that we got. So I thank, and back to you, Shani. Thank you.